Yesterday, Adam Schefter discussed some of the quarterbacks set to become free agents next season. One of the names he mentioned was Sam Darnold, and he suggested that the Las Vegas Raiders could be a realistic destination for him. Let's take a closer look at this possibility. During his report, Schefter also touched on other quarterback situations. In Pittsburgh, Russell Wilson's return remains a possibility, despite speculation that it may not happen. The Steelers have had ongoing discussions with Wilson, and while nothing is certain, he is set to become a free agent. Additionally, the Steelers are interested in Justin Fields and have made it clear that they want to bring back at least one of these two quarterbacks. Several teams are expected to pursue Fields, so his future remains uncertain. As for Sam Darnold, he is currently with the Minnesota Vikings, who have expressed interest in retaining him. However, re-signing him could be expensive, and the franchise tag is one possible option. Schefter noted that the Raiders are a team to watch in Darnold's situation. If Las Vegas decides to pursue him, they could make a strong effort to bring him in. Meanwhile, the New York Jets are undergoing significant changes, with a new coaching staff and general manager. In such cases, teams often look to bring in new players, which is why there is speculation that Aaron Rodgers may not return to New York. While nothing is confirmed, many around the league believe he could move on. Rodgers himself still needs to decide whether he wants to continue playing before any further discussions take place. Overall, Adam Schefter's report highlights key quarterback moves to watch this offseason. For the Raiders, the need for a quarterback is clear, and Darnold could be a potential option as they reshape their roster. Last season, the Raiders made some big decisions, and Tom Brady played a major role in shaping them. While Tom Telesco did a great job as general manager, especially in last year's draft, Brady reportedly preferred John Spytek for the position. As a result, the Raiders let go of Telesco, despite his success. This decision was likely influenced by Brady's recommendations to owner Mark Davis. Love him or hate him, Brady knows what he's doing, and his vision for the Raiders is becoming clearer. The team has already taken steps toward a new era, starting with the hiring of Super Bowl-winning head coach Pete Carroll. This was a solid move, bringing in a proven leader. Alongside him, the Raiders added Chip Kelly, an offensive-minded coach who has a strong track record of building successful systems. While Carroll focuses on defense, Kelly will take charge of the offense, which is exactly what the Raiders need. One of the biggest issues last season was the offensive system, or rather the failure to properly install one. Luke Getsy, the previous offensive coordinator, struggled in this area. Installing an offense isn't just about calling plays, it's about teaching the entire system, from route concepts to pre-snap adjustments. A well-installed offense allows players to react correctly based on the defense's formation. Getsy struggled with this both in Chicago and again in Las Vegas. But with Chip Kelly now in charge, things could be different. Kelly has successfully built offensive systems multiple times at Oregon, the Eagles, the 49ers, UCLA, and most recently at Ohio State. Now, he has the chance to do it again with the Raiders. If the Raiders had signed Sam Darnold last season, he likely would have struggled under the old system. But this year, with a better coaching staff and a more structured offense, Darnold could actually find success in Las Vegas. With the right system in place, the Raiders might finally have the foundation to compete at a higher level. With the Raiders' new coaching staff in place, the defense is expected to take a big step forward. Patrick Graham will continue calling plays on the defensive side, and it will be interesting to see how he works alongside Pete Carroll. If everything comes together, the Raiders could have an elite defense this season, depending on which free agents they bring back, which we'll discuss later. On the offensive side, Adam Schefter has pointed out that the Raiders are a team to watch when it comes to Sam Darnold. The key thing to remember is that Darnold will be a free agent unless the Minnesota Vikings decide to use the franchise tag on him. If they do tag him, they will owe him a guaranteed salary, and that cap hit will remain even if they trade him. However, the Vikings never plan to commit big money to a quarterback like Darnold. When they extended players like Justin Jefferson, Christian Darrisaw, and Jonathan Greenard, they were operating under the assumption that they'd have a rookie quarterback, possibly J.J. McCarthy, on a cheap contract. That plan changed when Darnold unexpectedly stepped in, but the Vikings aren't necessarily in a position to pay him $40 to $50 million per year. Their salary cap situation is already tight, making it uncertain whether they can afford to keep him. This opens the door for the Raiders. If Minnesota decides not to tag Darnold, Las Vegas could sign him as a free agent. The challenge, however, is that Darnold won't come cheap, and the Raiders' cap space isn't in great shape either. We'll dive deeper into that issue in a moment, But the bottom line is this. Schefter has made it clear that several quarterback moves are coming. The Jets aren't bringing back Aaron Rodgers, Justin Fields will have a strong market, and the Raiders are keeping a close eye on Darnold. With Tom Brady's influence and a new coaching staff in place, things are shaping up very differently for the Raiders this year. The Raiders are going to get a quarterback. It's just a matter of figuring out who. But beyond that, I want to shift the focus to something even bigger, the blueprint for success. The Philadelphia Eagles just won the Super Bowl, and while that was a great moment for them, there's a lot the Raiders can learn from their approach. For the past 10 years, the Eagles have built a model that works. They've made 3 Super Bowl appearances in that span and won 2 of them. Not because they had elite quarterbacks, but because they built a complete roster. The first time, they won with Nick Foles, and this time, Jalen Hurts led them to victory. While Hurts lost in his first Super Bowl appearance, he came back and got the job done this season. The key takeaway? You don't need a superstar quarterback to win championships. You need a well-built team. The foundation of the Eagles' success is their dominance in the trenches. Their offensive and defensive lines are among the best in the league, and that depth has been crucial. I followed the Eagles closely on the Football Scap channel, and their O-line and D-line aren't just stacked with stars. They also have strong backups. Everyone knows about Jordan Mailata, but even their backup linemen, like Tyler Steen, are solid players ready to step in when needed. The same goes for the defensive side. While stars like Jalen Carter and Josh Sweat stand out, they also have key contributors like Milton Williams, Nolan Smith, and other young defensive talents. The Eagles have built their success through smart drafting, player development, and keeping their core intact. Now let's bring it back to the Raiders. In many ways, the Raiders have the pieces to follow this same blueprint. Their defensive line, when fully healthy, can be just as dangerous as the Eagles. The difference? The Eagles have Jalen Carter, but the Raiders have Max Crosby, and the Eagles don't have a player like him. This means the Raiders already have a strong foundation on defense. They just need to continue building around it. If the Raiders truly want long-term success, they should take a page from the Eagles' book. Strengthen the trenches, develop depth, and build a well-rounded team. With the right moves, they can put themselves in a position to compete at the highest level. If you think about a defensive line featuring Max Crosby, Malcolm Kuntz, Adam Butler, and Christian Wilkins as the starters, that's an elite group. This could be one of the best defensive fronts in the league, if they stay healthy. And that doesn't even include key backups like Kayvon Chasson or Tyree Wilson, along with any other additions the Raiders might bring in this offseason. Now, let's talk about what the Raiders need to do to solidify this unit. First, they need to bring back key pieces like Chasson and Butler, but even beyond that, they have to figure out who will be the other starting defensive tackle. If Adam Butler fills that role, who becomes the third option in the rotation? And if the Raiders don't re-sign Munford or Chasson, who steps up on the edge opposite of Crosby? Maybe it's a rookie like Abdul Carter, who they could take with the 6th overall pick. The key to beating the Kansas City Chiefs, and we saw this in the one game the Raiders won against them last season, is getting after Patrick Mahomes. The Eagles use this exact formula all year, consistently pressuring opposing quarterbacks. That's why it starts with the defensive line. The Raiders already have a strong foundation, but they need to ensure they have enough depth and talent to sustain their pass rush dominance throughout the season. The challenge, however, is that keeping and improving this roster is going to be expensive. The Raiders have 27 free agents this offseason, and while they have around $95 million in cap space, bringing everyone back, even on conservative estimates, could cost around $89 million. For example, Malcolm Kuntz could cost around $13 million, Trayvon Merrick another $13 million, Adam Butler around $7 million, and Nate Hobbs about $5 million. And that's just a few names. Then there are players the Raiders could choose to replace, like Alexander Mattison at running back, but even swapping him out for someone else would still cost around $2 million. The bottom line is that the Raiders are in a tricky financial spot. They'll need to be smart with their spending while making sure they retain key contributors. If they can pull it off, they'll have the talent to compete at a high level next season. No matter who the Raiders bring in, every roster spot has a cost. Even at the bare minimum, a backup quarterback will cost around $985,000. That means, at the very least, replacing players and filling out the roster will cost about $89 million. Now, the Raiders could let some key players walk, like Trayvon Merrick or Malcolm Kuntz. Realistically, they might have to let 1 or 2 go and find replacements. But ideally, the team would want to retain them. Murig has developed into a top 5 safety, and Kunze looked like a top 10 pass rusher in the final 9 games of the season. These are homegrown talents, and retaining them is what separates successful franchises like the Ravens from teams that struggle with constant turnover. Another key player is Nate Hobbs. I estimated his cost at around $5 million, but in reality, he could command even more. The high-end estimate for keeping all key free agents would be around $141 million, which is obviously not realistic for the Raiders. That means some tough decisions are coming. If the team wants to maintain an elite defense and defensive line, they'll need to prioritize bringing back Kunze, Moehrig, Butler, Hobbs, and Robert Spillane. Those are 5 starters, and keeping them won't be cheap. Even if the Raiders fill other spots with rookies, the overall cost is still significant. The biggest challenge? If the Raiders decide to pursue a quarterback like Sam Darnold and pay him $40 million, they'll almost certainly lose some of these defensive pieces. That's where GM John Spytek will need to make some critical decisions about how to balance spending. There are ways to free up cap space, cutting a player like Gardner Minshew or trading Jacoby Myers, though that wouldn't be ideal. The Raiders could also choose to let Spillane walk and draft his replacement or decide not to pay Hobbs. As much as fans love Hobbs, if his price tag gets too high, it might make financial sense to move on. Ultimately, the Raiders need to decide what their defensive identity will be and how they'll allocate their cap space accordingly. I truly believe that our defensive line is elite, but there are other major areas the Raiders need to fix this offseason to be a legitimate contender. One of the biggest issues, the offensive line. Some fans might disagree, but the Raiders' O-line is still not very good. If you watched the Super Bowl, you saw what an elite offensive line looks like. The Philadelphia Eagles have the best O-line in the NFL. The Raiders are nowhere near that level. The Eagles can send 4 receivers downfield because their offensive line can handle 5-man pass protection. The Raiders, on the other hand, often have to use 2 tight ends and a running back to help block. That limits how many receivers can run routes and makes it much harder for the quarterback to push the ball downfield. If the Raiders want to improve, they must revamp the offensive line to reach a point where they can confidently block with just 5 men. Now, the team does have 2 long-term building blocks. Colton Miller, 28 to 29 years old. Paris Johnson, 21 years old. These 2 should be anchors for the next 5 years. But the left guard, and right tackle end spots still need solutions. Potential free agent additions. Some fans have suggested that the Raiders should bring back Jordan Meredith, a pending free agent, or sign guys like Mekhi Becton or Trey Smith. These players are physical dominant blockers who could help the O-line. However, signing a high-level guard like Trey Smith could cost $12 million per year. And realistically, the Raiders don't have that kind of cap space. As we discussed earlier, just filling the bottom 20 roster spots will cost around $40 million. On top of that, re-signing key defensive players like Malcolm Kunze, Trayvon Moehrig, Adam Butler, Nate Hobbs, and Robert Spillane could each cost around $10 million. With limited money, spending big on guards just doesn't make sense. Instead, the Raiders should look to the draft for young, cost-effective offensive linemen, especially on the interior. This upcoming draft class has strong interior offensive line prospects, making it the best option for upgrading the O-line without overspending. Fine. Addressing the draft and key roster decisions, I truly believe that this is the best interior offensive line draft class in the last 20 years. If the Raiders want to strengthen the offensive line, the 2025 draft provides a prime opportunity to do so. As the draft approaches, the Raiders have a few different paths they can take, especially depending on what they decide with Malcolm Kunze. Defensive end options if the Raiders let Kunze walk. If the Raiders decide, not to pay Malcolm Kunze, they could target a top-tier defensive end with the number 6 pick. Some potential options include Abdul Carter, Penn State, a top-tier prospect who could go in the top 4 or even number 1st overall. If he's available, he'd be an elite addition to the Raiders' pass rush. James Pierce, Jr., Tennessee. At 6 feet 5 inches, 260 pounds. He has elite movement skills and could be the first defensive end off the board. Mike Green. Another promising defensive end who could be an option in the top 10. If Abdul Carter is gone and the Raiders want to save the $13 to $18 million, it would take to re-sign Kunsey. Drafting one of these edge rushers could be a smart move. However, if the Raiders keep Kunsey, then their draft strategy shifts. That what? Ars. Offensive line options with the number 6 pick. If the Raiders are signed Kunsey and pass on a defensive end, they could use the number 6 pick to secure their future right tackle. Two top tackle prospects stand out. Josh Connerly Jr., Oregon. Some have criticized his Senior Bowl performance, but I still believe he'll be a top 10 to 15 pick. When the draft arrives, Josh Simmons, Ohio State. A great athlete and a very smooth mover at the position. He's a strong option if the Raiders go with a tackle. A wildcard option could be Anthony Belton, who also has the potential to play tackle. Making the right call. The Raiders have a tough choice. 1. Draft a defensive end at number 6 and let Kuntz walk to save money. 2. Re-sign Kuntze and draft a future right tackle at number 6 to solidify the offensive line. Either way, the draft will be critical for shaping the Raiders' future. Stat. Addressing the offensive line with top guards and draft strategy. In my opinion, the Raiders need to focus heavily on upgrading their offensive line. This offseason, it's crucial to secure all 2 new guards to solidify the interior head of the line. For the Raiders, I would go for a second-round pick to target Anthony Belton and Charles Grant, 2 players I believe will become top 5 guards in the NFL. Both of them have the potential to be dominant movers in the trenches. While some teams might consider converting them to offensive tackles, I think their best fit is at guard, where they can make a real impact. At the guard position, people movers are essential. Players who can push defensive tackles out of the way, creating running lanes. There are different types of linemen, people holders, like Jordan Merritt-Allers and Dylan Parham, who hold their ground and prevent penetration. People movers, like Mekhi Becton, who drive defenders off their spot and create huge lanes for running backs. Currently, the Raiders have a lot of holders, but they need more movers on the inside. By drafting Anthony Belton or Charles Grant, the Raiders can acquire elite power in the trenches, helping improve their run game significantly. If the Raiders decide not to focus on guards with their top picks, they could still find value in later rounds with players like Puffs, Wyatt Williams. A solid option, likely in the far 3rd or 4th round. Ants. Gray Sable. Recognized as one of the best offensive linemen at the Senior Bowl. He could be an option in the 3rd round. Jonah Savannah. Arizona. And Jatelli Simpkins. And South Carolina. Both are names to watch, with Simpkins showing impressive tape and potential to be a great player. At Chafrik, and adding a wide receiver. Another position the Raiders need to address is wide receiver. If they don't go with an offensive tackle or a defensive end, with the number 6 pick, they should consider taking a wide receiver in the draft. DJ Glaze could be a potential target if the Raiders want to improve their receiving cores. This year, the Raiders could consider bringing back Malcolm Koonce and focusing on adding a wide receiver with the number 6 pick. Players like Tetro McMillan from Arizona or Travis Hunter might be available. While Hunter's availability isn't guaranteed, he could go in the top 5 if quarterbacks are taken early. He would be a full-time wide receiver, an option, which is exactly what the Raiders need. If McMillan or Hunter are there, either could make a big impact. Alternatively, if the Raiders need to free up some salary space, they could consider trading Trayvon Mullen, who is set to make $19 million next year, making him one of the highest-paid cornerbacks. Instead of paying that to Mullen, They could reallocate those funds to Amari Cooper or trade for T. Higgins. The Raiders have options to improve their roster, but it will require making some tough financial decisions. Volfreyars. Quarterback strategy. Taking a page from Jalen Hurts' journey, looking at the quarterback position. It's important to note that Jalen Hurts, when he first entered the NFL, was not seen as a guaranteed starter and wasn't even a first-round pick. He was drafted in that second round, 15th overall, by the Philadelphia Eagles. However, the Eagles built a strong team around him, focusing on a physical running game and dominating the trenches. This philosophy helped them reach 2 Super Bowls. The Raiders, while they may not have a Jalen Hurts situation, aren't far from that model. To be successful, the Raiders need to fix the offensive line by adding a new guard and possibly addressing the right tackle position. Bring back key defensive players like Coons, Chasen, and Adam Butler. 8. Quarterback options. For the Raiders could include someone like Sam Darnold, or they could explore a short-term fix with someone like Aaron Rodgers or Jalen Milroe, or another QB in the second round. In my opinion, quarterback isn't as much of a priority right now compared to offensive line and defensive line. Building a strong foundation up front is key to long-term success. Of course, if the Raiders want to land a player like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, they'll need to draft a top 10 quarterback. However, the team's priority should focus more on the trenches.